What's up everyone, Artex here with another video for you today. Today I've got something kind of interesting I wanted to share. It's a video that I wanted to do for a while now and just really haven't had the time. Life gets in the way, as I'm sure most of you know, especially during a pandemic. So things get a little hectic once in a while, but I had some time I want to carve out today just to kind of do this video. Real, I would say probably cut and dry, no glitz and glam, but hopefully you'll find it interesting. So I have a board here. You're looking at an Asus TX97X, which is a socket 7 board from back in the day. I do believe this was released in 1997, around the August time frame, if I'm not mistaken. It's a decent board. You know, it's classic old school Asus. It's an ATX form factor. This one again is a socket 7, not super socket 7, which came a little later, so a little bit more restrictive as far as the range of processors that can be used on this. But I wanted to keep things kind of period specific, and I'll explain that in a minute. But the board itself, again, nothing too special about it. It's got some interesting features. Obviously this has some DIMMs here, which is kind of nice, and I have a ton of memory, 168-pin DIMMs here, which I can use. I have a PC100 DIMM in here right now, but it's got 3 DIMMs, which is nice. It's also got 4 ISA slots. For most of you that know me or follow me on Vogons, you know I'm a huge enthusiast and very passionate about sound cards, and so having the flexibility here of leveraging 4 ISA slots in a build is pretty nice. So typically what I would do here is, build a period specific system. Typically I would have a sound card in here that's a Creative Labs, some variant of a Creative Labs sound card, whether that's AUS64 or what have you, Sound Blaster 16, Sound Blaster Pro, and then typically I would add another standalone sound card just for MIDI. And I know some people don't really do that, but I like to. I know it can kind of complicate things with IRQs and DMAs and all those fun conflicts from back in the day, but typically I would use something for, let's say like an Ensoniq Soundscape S2000 or an Ensoniq Soundscape Elite, which is a massive, very, very long, full-length plus ISA card. So even if I can fit it in a case, which is very difficult to find a case that fits that card, especially the older cases, I would use that for general MIDI. Same with a Roland sound card, for example. I'm a real big fan of the Roland SCC1 or 1A, if you will. Those just kind of really plug and play, throw them in here, and you have amazing MIDI output using that hardware. So again, nice to have the flexibility of using more than one sound card here if needed. This does use the Intel 430TX chipset. Got 4 PCI slots here. For my benching, I typically just throw in an ATI Rage Pro card, which this one is a, oh, that won't do it. That's AGP. Not sure where that card went right now, but we typically would use that just because it's very compatible with this type of motherboard, and again, period specific for benching. With 2D, it doesn't really matter too much anyway. So what else? This board also has PS2 on board, which is nice. Don't have to deal with any of the serial mice, that kind of thing. It also has USB, which I don't really care to use because USB is painfully slow on old equipment like this. Typically, again, I would use a compact flash card, which I will be using here, plugged into one of the onboard IDE controllers here, or I would use something like a external, or I should say not external, but a 2.5-inch SATA drive connected to an IDE to SATA adapter here, which worked pretty well for my needs. So normally if I'm doing a Windows 98 build, I will build a system using these, and then I will label that so that I can use it with a system. I know which drive is for what system, and don't have any problems with compatibility, etc. But again, for simple benching in DOS on a board like this, I will just stick with the old reliable compact flash to IDE adapter, which I'll throw in here in a minute. So again, I could have probably gone with a newer board, a newer Super Socket 7 board with this setup. which would allow me to use newer processors, you know, the K6-2, K6-3, K6-3 Plus chips. But the video today is not necessarily so much about the motherboard. It is about what is installed in the motherboard under this lovely Startech 1U low profile heatsink fan combination. And today, what I want to be talking about is this lovely processor right here, which is the AMD K5-PR200 chip. It is one that I've had in my collection for a while. I actually have a couple of these laying around. Here's another one, for example. I do have a couple of these in my collection, and I just haven't had a chance to actually dig in and get them installed and tested. These processors, if you don't know, are pretty rare nowadays and really highly sought after by retro enthusiasts like myself. These kind of fall in line with the classic Cyrix 133 4X type rarity for these chips. You know, they just, this one especially is rare because when it was produced, AMD was getting ready to release their K6 chip. So this, I don't know how many of these are in circulation. The ones I've had here, it required quite a bit of work to get functional, correcting pins, straightening them out, trying to make these things look presentable. A lot of them, for whatever reason I've seen in the hands of collectors, just look really beat up. I don't know why that is, if they're just not being stored properly or damaged in shipping. I don't really know, but so it took me a few hours to get these to a point where they would seat in the socket nicely and mate nice and flat. So again, these chips are extremely rare. I don't know how many of them are out there, but I've been trying to collect these for some time now. I do have a few of them, as I said, in my collection, and I wanted to do some benchmarking on these because I've never done them, and I wanted to see what kind of performance they would have using Phil's excellent suite of DOS benchmarking utilities he's put together there. So I'll be using that here too. This is a 66 megahertz chip, a bus chip, I should say, and I believe this one runs at 133 megahertz, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll have to see what is reported, but I believe I have the board jumpered properly for that speed. 66 megahertz bus with the multiplier set appropriately, and then the voltage set at 3.5 volts as well, which this board obviously supports. Again, I could have thrown this in a newer motherboard that has a SuperSocket 7 compatibility with newer processors, but I figured this one is close enough to the period of time when this was released, and should make for a good set of some benchmark results here. So I hope you're excited. I'm excited to see what this yields. I know I've heard quite a bit about these chips, and that they for people who have them, they don't want to let them go, and myself included. I just, there's something about these that are just have a mystique about them, just because they are so rare, and they never really were announced necessarily. So the fact that there's still some of these floating around there is pretty exciting to me, and very excited to try these out today. So without further ado, I will get the camera set up here, and we'll run through some benchmarks. I'm going to add my ATI card in here. I'll probably leave everything else just kind of as is. I'll use my CF card in here as well. I did update the BIOS on this motherboard to the latest beta BIOS that was available, which took a little searching. I also had some weird issues with the flash writing utility, that A-Flash. There's a couple of different versions out there. I ran into some weirdness where I would try to flash it, and I would get an error about the board being write protected, or the BIOS being write protected, which there is no jumper on this particular board, to my knowledge, that either enables or disabled that. So I ended up using P-Flash, which was able to get the board flashed up to the most recent BIOS. So I should be current there. And I think that's about it for now. So let's get into it. All right, guys, I have the motherboard loaded up here. So I have my PCI ATI card in here, connected up, VGA obviously. PS2 mouse and keyboard, and I'll tell you how nice it is to use PS2 again. I love boards that have integrated PS2. I do have a floppy emulator here. I don't know if I'll be using that, but I plugged it in with a couple of thumb drives preloaded with some boot images. I do have a 4 gigabyte compact flash card here, plugged into the first IDE port. So that should be ready to rock with Phil's suite of DOS benchmarks. I have a copper cooler on there because I think these will probably run pretty warm. The more that I read about them, that they do tend to get pretty warm. So hopefully that nice all copper heatsink and decent fan will keep that thing nice and cool while we crank up some of these benchmarks. And then of course I just have a little speaker plugged in here, little ATX power switch that I picked up, and I am using a Seasonic, I think it's a 550 watt ATX power supply connected up to the motherboard. So I think we'll be ready to roll. Let's see how it works. Alright guys, so there you have it. This is the AMD K5-PR200. All the benchmarks are run obviously in DOS. I think what I might do is try to install Windows 95 or even Windows 98 SE on the system and do some Windows benchmarks there, because I'm curious to see how this processor will perform in that environment. The PR rating is always interesting, the Pentium rating. I know the floating point of this unit is actually fairly strong. But I'm curious how this would do as compared to a Pentium 200 with MMX not releasing until 1997. So again, it seems to be a fairly quick processor for what it is. I know it's fairly limited, and I think that was really the problem with these processors, is that they couldn't really push too far past 133 megahertz. So that's really where the show stops with this processor. But again, kind of a fun little thing to tinker with, and certainly it's probably worth, like I said, probably worth installing Windows 95 just to see how it does in some of those benchmarks as compared to some of the later generation competition, and including the Pentium 200 with and without MMX. I'm curious to see how this will do. So leave your comments below, and hopefully we'll have some more content soon. I have a bunch of different things I'd like to test, including some sound cards, some video cards, a bunch of stuff that's kind of sitting on my shelves that I really haven't had a whole lot of time to tinker with, that I feel like I owe it to the enthusiast to at least create some content based on some of that hardware, which is just kind of sitting on my shelves right now and itching to be used. So more content to come in the future, but I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, leave your comments and questions in the comments below, and hopefully we'll have some more content for you all soon. Thanks.